Hi, welcome to Holding Space. I'm Caleb Mayo. So UFOs are real. That is the craziest piece of information I've had to onboard, maybe ever, but certainly in the last few years. And that's why I'm here to talk about it. Maybe you've been thinking about this also. Maybe you're just stumbling onto the topic randomly for some reason. What I'd like to do with Holding Space is hold space and time psychologically and physically for this conversation, for people processing it, for our emotions and ideas around the UFO and non-human intelligence phenomena. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about why I want to do that, starting with what I would like to ask guests when I eventually have them on this show. First, I'd like to ask them, and so I'll ask myself today, how are you feeling emotionally, generally? It's a crazy time. The world is changing very fast. A lot of really scary and weird things are happening out there. Some of them are very sad. Some of them are very violent. Some of them are very exciting. And everybody's lives are a little hectic. So, how are you feeling? I'm fine right now in answer to this question. My life's a little crazy too. I care for my mom. I live with my mom and dad and our dog. I'm 42 recording this. I'm an actor who sometimes gets to act. Sometimes I write. Sometimes I think about aliens. And sometimes I sell t-shirts. More later on how that goes. How are you feeling is what I'd love to ask anybody that I would talk to about this. But since this is a video, can't really move on to that. The next big question is, what do you think is going on with the phenomenon? People call it a lot of different things. People have a lot of different theories. People think about it a lot of different ways. But cards on the table, I think it's mostly aliens. I think there might be some other aspects to it, like cryptozoological creatures like fairies and Bigfoot, for example, no longer seem as crazy and silly to me as they used to. But heart of hearts, gut of guts, I think a lot of these beings are coming here from far away. It might be interdimensional travel, or it might just be straight up space travel. They might have bases nearby, they might have bases in between. But it seems to me, based on morphology of their crafts and different descriptions of their bodies, that they are probably many different races from many different places. And I think they're coming here on flying ships. We have some pretty good evidence that they can at least descend from 80,000 feet to like sea level and reascend pretty quickly. And they've popped up all over the place looking like different things for at least 100 years and maybe for thousands of years. Because once you get into the lore, it starts seeming an awful lot like these things have been here for a really long time. So the next big thing to ask about is, how are you feeling about the cover up? This is uncomfortable. I would say the alien stuff is actually pretty exciting by comparison to the cover up stuff. The cover up, unfortunately, kind of upends some amount, at least, of what we have told ourselves about the way the world works scientifically and politically, at least in the West and specifically in America, for a couple hundred years now. And that's really uncomfortable, especially for a pro-government type like me. I would like healthy and robust government to do a lot of good things for a lot of people. I believe in transparent government. I believe in accountable government. I believe that the logic of power derives from a mandate from the masses. And I think we're finding in discovering that this cover up has been happening, that there's been a serious perversion somewhere along the line of the military industrial complex with regard to its accountability to the civilian government, which theoretically oversees and controls it. And as we're learning more in the last few years about the way the system works, we're finding out that there's a deep ongoing cover up that's lasted for a really long time, and that includes a group of people who have basically been accountable to no one except themselves. It's a large group of people. It's at least in the hundreds. And if reporting is to be believed, it hasn't always included top officials in the Defense Department and even some or possibly all presidents at some level, which is incredibly disturbing. Obviously, kind of shakes to the core our understanding of civilian oversight, military intelligence, and technological operations in our government. So that part is genuinely really bad. And I think we need to do something about it. And I'll return to that at the end. Scientifically, alongside that, we always thought, we believed from birth or from the earliest scientific teachings in our lives that we, the people, had access to the edge of scientific research. Like maybe you didn't understand quantum entanglement or string theory, but someone really smart could explain it to you. And if you paid enough attention, you might figure it out. What we're finding, unfortunately, is that that's not strictly speaking true with regard to one of, if not the single most important scientific discoveries in the history of humanity. So that's shocking. And it's in some ways really bad. It's also pretty understandable. And I guess I'd like to talk about that now while we're still here. It's understandable for scientists because there's been a huge threat to their reputations. If they come out and discuss this stuff publicly, they can lose their grant money, they can lose their careers, they might get run out of high-end institutions where they've worked their whole lives to get a tenured position. So there's very high risk to even investigating this area. And you've seen in the last few years, scientists who have stepped up to the plate and done some research in this area have faced withering criticism from other scientists and from mainstream media organizations. So that's really tough for them. Then in the military and intelligence community, and to some extent these freelancing, or not freelancing, but contracted aerospace company personnel, in their world, there's a similar threat, except it's backed up by legal threats. So if you were to disclose that you were going to work at Lockheed Martin and designing an antimatter or anti-gravity drive based on a spaceship that crashed on the planet, you might get arrested. And now, only recently have we finally written in some laws to protect you if you do come forward with that information. But that's not a guarantee that you won't still be heavily leaned on. And if you were to try to say, remove documentary evidence from this program, which skeptics repeatedly have asked these people to do, you might be thrown in jail for the rest of your life before you even got the chance to present that evidence to anyone. So it's understandable, obviously, that people in these programs don't want to share the information. And then at a higher level, it's understandable that the military and intelligence control of this operation has stayed secret because the operational imperative there is to maintain secrecy for national security interest. We don't want Russia and China finding out what we know about this amazing technology. Ideally, we'd like to beat them to it in terms of figuring out what it does and how to control it. And corporationally, you can sort of see the same logic at play in Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing and whoever else is involved in this. They want to keep their edge. They've got these materials. They don't want to give them up to public consumption because they could be incredibly valuable down the road for making lots of money and controlling world markets. So there's a lot of incentive within the cover-up for keeping it that way. You can totally understand why they would. And that brings me to what we need to do, which is something. We have to speak out in some way because we're getting failed by the mainstream institutions that would apply sufficient pressure on this cover-up to open it. There are people hammering away at the wedge in the crack here, that we are making some progress thanks to the really great work of some really brave people who have worked for a really long time and very carefully to try and expose some of this information in a legal way that could get the rest of our attention and encourage us to do something about this situation. But we've been largely failed by the scientific community, and unfortunately, most of the, don't love using this phrase, but mainstream media, which just doesn't want to cover this stuff because they've got a high reputational cost that they could potentially pay. And so they only want to cover it when they have absolutely clear information about what's going on. But the cover up wants to prevent them from getting that information. So there's sort of a catch-22 going on where the media says, we won't cover this until we get documentary evidence. And the cover up says, we'll never give you documentary evidence so that you don't cover us. It's probably not a catch-22, but you can see what's happening. There's a failure to report on this situation. And as a result, we're left to just a few whistleblowers and a few journalists, dogged, rugged, hardcore journalists who've been pursuing this very clearly and very intelligently for a really long time, but it's not a mass movement. So that's why I'm here speaking up, because I'm just a person like all you other people. And I would love to talk to you about how you're thinking about this situation. And I'd love to talk to anybody, especially in the UFO community, who's going through weird emotions processing this whole situation, because it's frankly very weird and it's crazy. It changes a whole lot about what we think of the world, of how we think it works. A lot of the physics we thought we knew are going to be upended by this. A lot of our basic intuitions about our place in the universe might change radically on the other side of this revelation. And yeah, some of our expectations and understanding about the role of government and military and intelligence and technological industry might change and certainly need to be radically updated to come back in line with our original Enlightenment values of pure liberalism and true accountability and transparency, and let's say it, democracy, because that's the best system of government, really. There are some, modifications to make to absolute democracy, but democracy, it's pretty good. It's the best system, except for all the other more fun systems. Anyway, that's the big picture. The only other thing I wanted to talk about was skeptics and people who aren't really on board. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to be too mean. But my basic thinking on this subject is that if you haven't reached the point where you're comfortable saying UFOs are real, then you probably haven't watched this far in the video. Who am I kidding? But people who haven't reached that point have just not been paying sufficient attention. So it's not our job, and it's not UFO's job to convince those people, but we kind of have to try, I guess, because we have to try to apply sufficient pressure on this cover up to get at the truth. That's what I think we should all be doing. We should be trying to get the truth so that we can move into this new paradigm together, transparently and democratically, to decide what to do about all this crazy stuff. And in the meantime, I think we owe it to ourselves as healthy adults to process this responsibly. So if you'd like to talk about aliens or UFOs or non-human intelligence or the phenomena, whatever else you'd like to call it, please reach out. I'd love to talk with you. You could also just leave a comment, maybe a mean comment. I know everyone on the internet loves doing that. Thank you for taking this silly amount of time to talk about this very serious but pretty wild issue. I hope to come back and talk with you more in the future. Thank you.